This has never been tried before in human history. I've looked very hard for historical precedents in order to inform the way we might approach this particular problem, but there are none. Okay, this is, we've been running Zooms, as I said, every night during the week. Last week Victoria, this week WA, and we'll continue with all the states. And it's a long talk. And the introduction I give them is Australia One's big picture, because it's important to understand how everyone fits into the master plan, and there is one. Now, let's just kick it off. Whenever you plan a large, complex operation, one of the first things you do is set your intention. It comprises three parts: purpose, method, end state. Okay. And if you look on the screen, you'll see that. It says purpose, method, end state. Purpose is what you're going to do. Method is how you're going to do it. The end state is a description of the world once you have finished. It's a series of metrics by which you can indicate, yes, we've achieved our objectives, the war is over, the operation is done, let's go home. And so we've done the same thing. Now, what kicked this off was when my family and I returned back from the Middle East after many, many years in the Middle East, 6 years ago. We knew that Australia had been in bad shape. We'd been monitoring events from Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And we landed at Mascot Airport in Sydney. And it was a shock. It was like landing in the airport of a third world country. It was dirty. The staff were surly and rude. And it got worse from there. And that was just the beginning. And I think I may have mentioned it before. We realised, my God, what's happened to Australia? And by every metric, there were problems. And we've gone through that, so we won't go through it again. And that's why we got into politics. But then we had to sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do and why? So the first thing we sorted out was our purpose. And it's to save Australia. But to save Australia from what is your first question? That's a good question. Well, the Islamists, the communists, the globalists, the psychopaths, the corporations, the pedophiles, the lot. Because these are the real threats that we're facing. So that's the mob that we're going to save Australia from. So what are we going to create? What's our end state? Because you leave method to the end. Don't go to method yet, because people, it's the old saying, if you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, that's not what you do. And let me give you an example. Let's say there's a siege hostage situation at Mascot Airport. There's an aircraft, 150 passengers on board, half a dozen terrorists, and you've been told to resolve this situation. Now, what's the end state, do you think? Well, the end state would be all the hostages are alive, the terrorists are neutralised, and the aircraft has received as little damage as possible, because if you get that wrong, you've got a problem. And so the mission isn't to kill the terrorists. The mission, of course, is to rescue the hostages, save the lives of the hostages. That's the mission. And so we had the same approach here. What is our end state? How do we know when we've succeeded? Well, the end state's really quite simple. We wanted to create a country that was moral, sovereign, self-reliant, Christian Western democracy, which is economically powerful, militarily intimidating, politically free, culturally vibrant, and socially cohesive. And that's the nation we wanted to build. Why? Because these are the qualities of the nation that we once were, and the most powerful, successful, generous civilizations that have ever been built. And this is, excuse me, this end state is predicated on hard experience overseas. But it's very clear. This is the prism through which we examine every possible policy question. And policy is always a tension between autonomy and the public good. And so it's always a judgment call. But for example, a sovereign nation. And if anything degrades from that sense of sovereignty, well, it's not in, for example, the United Nations. That's why we want to withdraw from the UN, because it's interfering with our sovereignty. We don't want that. Self-reliant. We in Australia have everything we need to succeed. We don't actually need the rest of the world. We want to engage with the rest of the world, but setting ourselves up with a single point of failure, like successive federal governments have done with China, is just dumb. It's bad business. And so you can go through the list. So this is what we're aiming for. But here's where it's different. And this is why people have to understand this isn't some naked grab for power, because it's not. It's anything but that. This has never been tried before in human history. I've looked very hard for historical precedents in order to inform the way we might approach this particular problem. But there are none. The problem has never been this profound. The adversary has never been so titanic in scope and size and power. It is utterly unique. And so there's only one way to save it. There's only one way to save the country. And this is it. This is the method. We create a moral political party that empowers Australians to reach their highest individual potential so that collectively all can participate in the reformation of Australia. Now let me read that again, because every word is pregnant with meaning. It's very important. This isn't like some business vision that you stick on the wall and everybody ignores. This is key. We are to create a moral political party which empowers Australians to reach their highest individual potential so that collectively all can participate in the reformation of Australia. And this is the method right now because we have been degraded, and we've discussed this many times, we don't have to go through it again, but the country has been degraded at every level for decade after decade after decade. We've got to the point where people can't tell what's right and wrong anymore. We've got to the point where people need advice on whether killing a baby at full term is legitimate. And then, as we've said before, they're discussing post-birth abortion. You know, it's just insane. Peter Singer, an Australian bioethicist, I think he calls himself, he's a lunatic as far as I'm concerned, and he was awarded by Julia Gillard. This guy believes that, for example, that people shouldn't have personhood until the age of 2. So you've got a Prime Minister of Australia rewarding a lunatic that thinks you can kill babies up until the age of 2 because they haven't achieved personhood. And that's what I mean by not knowing right and wrong anymore. And so that's how degraded we are. Now, by we, I don't mean the people. Your average Australian is well aware what's going on. And I've got to tell you, the A1 family is attracting them like a magnet. They're great. But the organs of state, the polity, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, the constabulary, the military, the media, the universities, academia, the lot, they are so corrupted, that's what's got to be fixed. The people are fine, the people are in great shape, and they know what's wrong. But this is why this is like no other political party ever, like no enterprise begun by anybody ever. It is quite unique. And I'm quite comfortable with that, but that's the intention, and people need to understand that. Now, the second step, what do we do to do that? It's nice to have a good idea, but how do we do it? Now, I'm going to show you a schematic now of the meta process behind what we're doing. So let's go through that. This is called the Synchronization Matrix. Most people understand that if you have a large complex operation, you break it down into its constituent objectives, and then you sequence them chronologically. You achieve the first, which leads to the second, and so on. And that makes sense. But when it's extremely large and complex, you also have separate lines of operation. Now, let me explain that to you. The landing of the beaches on Normandy, for example, they just didn't lob up one morning and throw the poor bloody infantry onto the beach, because that's just murder. So there was a series of other operations directly impacting that operation, but not involved in it. For example, there would have been spies in Berlin collecting intelligence and passing that back to the Allied headquarters. The French resistance were destroying rolling stock, railway lines, interfering with munitions productions in factories, and this is well before the landing, in order to make it difficult for the Germans to respond with reinforcements once the main effort was identified, because they weren't sure which beach the Allies would land. And then, as we were closer to D-Day proper, paratroops would have been dropped behind enemy lines, securing crossroads, bridges, high ground, in order to facilitate Allied movement and interfere with the German movement. And then finally, we were close to the actual landing, where the naval gunfire support began on the fortifications on the Atlantic Wall, destroying those. And then finally, the infantry were put in the landing craft and delivered to the beach. So you can understand there, you have all of these activities were contributing to the operation, but they had to be synchronized, and they're very, very separate, and we're doing the same thing. So have a look at the screen now. And there are the phases. Phase 1, build a party. Phase 2, win the people. Phase 3, win representation. Phase 4, win the balance of power. Phase 5, win government, and then we continue. Now that makes sense. There's nothing mystical about that. But these separate lines of operations are what we've got rolling. Now, you'll see the first line of operation is politics. That's the obvious. There are 5 additional lines of operation which are all classified. Now, don't be offended if I don't tell you what they are, because not even the executive is aware of all of the 5 lines of operation. Like any good operation, if you need to know, you're briefed in. And if you don't need to know, you're not briefed in. And they're mature and intelligent enough to understand that. So there's the politics. That's contesting seats, handing out how to vote, getting people elected, and all that sort of stuff. Now, it might surprise people. This is the most visible but least critical to our ultimate success. We could actually never get one member of parliament elected over the next 40 years, and we will still achieve our objective. So when people say this is a naked grab for power, it's because they're imbeciles and they couldn't find a beer in a brewery. Seriously, they don't. So this is not This is far more important and far more profound. This is a multi-decade operation with several lines of operation. Now, the other lines of operation, which contribute to the success and the achievement of the objective, are synchronized carefully with the whole lot. And so everything happens on time and exactly the way it's supposed to. And so the metaphor of the soldiers landing on the beach, that's the election day, that's where people are actually voting. But leading up to that day, a lot of work is being done, very hidden. When the history of A1 is written in 10, 20, 30 years, maybe then the full truth will come out, but not for a long time. It'll eventually come out. And so why is this important? It's important for A1 to understand that there is a large multi-layered plan to combat what has been a multi-decade, multi-layered plan by incredibly sophisticated and dangerous adversaries. And it goes back beyond you can imagine. But this is the only way we can beat them. This is what we must do to make sure. Now, does this have some immediate input? You betcha. Because the next federal election is due no later than May 2022. And I think I might have said it before. I anticipate that Morrison will be going to the polls before the end of next year. So he's going to call it early, and I think it'll be somewhere around the end of 2021. So A1, the A1 family is being briefed that we are going to contest that election, but here's the objective. We will hold the balance of power in the next federal parliament. Just to remind everybody, that's what we're going to do. We're going to hold the balance of power. We're going to win 6 or 7 seats, because that's absolutely doable. We'll be contesting a whole lot more, but we'll be contesting 6 or 7 seats and hold the balance of power. And so when you land on that beach on election day, 2021, that's that red line of operation you can see there. Know that a lot has been done behind the scenes to make sure that you not only storm the beach, that you move forward. And as I've said once before, we're going to Berlin, and we're not going to stop there. We're going to go all the way. We're going to wave at Moscow on the way past and head straight to Beijing. So there you go. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to explain that, because the A1 meetings that we've been having every night, which go for a couple of hours, they love it. They understand, okay, we get an idea that this is something more than we've ever seen before.